The fast etude for year C is the Allegretto by Böhme, and it's considerably simpler, really, than the slow etudes for either trombone or euphonium and tuba in this set. Now, simple is not always the same thing as easy. There are considerable technical challenges to overcome here, but you've pretty much got the same kind of material throughout, so once you figure out how to work on it, then executing that is, well, simple. But let's begin with defining our terms. Allegretto. The etto there is a diminutive, so if allegro is fast, then allegretto is little fast. It's a little slower than allegro. And in my experience, this term also implies a certain lightness, which is reinforced by the marking we see underneath there where it says légère. And this is the French equivalent of the Italian term leggero. And this simply means that the etude should be played lightly or delicately. Now, tempo. Your instructions indicate that this etude should be played with a quarter note at 88 to 96 beats a minute. While I wouldn't recommend going faster than 96 in the audition room, you might find that once you find a groove on this one, the faster end of the indicated tempo range is actually a little easier than the slower end. Now, speaking of tempo, practice this etude slowly and quickly. I recommend practicing at half tempo, then 75% of tempo, then at tempo, then at 125% of tempo, and then at tempo again. Practicing slowly helps you to get the notes and play them in tune, while practicing more quickly than the written tempo helps to make the written tempo feel more comfortable, because then you're going to be settling into that 96 beats a minute rather than always aspiring and reaching up to it. Also, regarding practicing slowly and quickly, but especially slowly, do it with the metronome on. A lot of times when people do slow practice, they do it out of time, out of rhythm. They might even ignore the dynamics and articulations. They just try to get the notes. The problem with this is that once you start increasing the speed, you've got to learn the rhythms now, and you've got to learn the dynamics and the articulation. It ends up taking longer to get it. But if right from the get-go, even when you're practicing at half tempo, you're still trying to play the right rhythms, and you're still trying to play with consistent timing, and you're still trying to do dynamics and articulation, then when you begin to go faster, all you have to do is go faster. So it's a little harder maybe to get started that way, but it saves you a ton of time in the long run. Now, when you're playing an etude like this, you need to be aware of which notes are the most musically important. For the most part, this is going to be the notes that are the longer notes and or the notes that are on the beats, on beats 1 and 2 rather than on the ands or somewhere else within the beat. There is a section like the second phrase there where the rhythm turns around and you've got 2/16 and an eighth instead of an eighth and 2/16. And there still, even though the 16th notes are shorter notes, the emphasis is going to stay with the downbeat. And as you start thinking this way, I think it'll become obvious where the structurally important notes are. Again, usually the longer notes, pretty much always the notes that are on the downbeats. Those are the ones that are kind of the bones of the whole piece, if you will, and then some of these moving 16ths are more like, muscles and connective tissue and things, if you want to think in that way. What we don't want is what low brass players tend to do a lot of times. They tongue fast-moving notes too hard and give them way too much weight, and so everything just gets hammered to death. What you really want is to figure out where are those musically important notes. They get the emphasis. All the other fast-moving stuff is just moving to and from those more important notes. If you do that, you're going to find this is more musically pleasing to hear and also just easier to execute physically. Whereas if you just start pounding everything with the tongue, the tendency is to slow down as well as just sound not all that satisfying musically. Also thinking about the musical flow of the piece, thinking about dynamics. Now the marked dynamics here are pretty sparse. I mean, yeah, there are some, and of course when there is a marked dynamic change, you should observe it. But otherwise you can allow the dynamic level to rise and fall slightly following the shapes of the musical lines. That again, it'll make the whole thing sound more pleasing. And I think you'll find that as the musical shape carries you along, the execution becomes easier as well. Sixth, and maybe a little surprisingly, I think you should ignore the staccato markings here. If you're playing at the indicated tempo, simply tonguing the 16th notes will make them short enough. What I'm afraid of is that if you're thinking staccato, you're going to tongue too hard or clip the notes or just have a whole lot of tongue and not very much tone. We really do want to have a pleasing sound on everything that we play. And so, yeah, just tongue and blow. I really don't think you need to worry about trying so hard to be short. All right, as always, plan and mark your breaths. And make sure that your initial breath is a breath for a full beat in tempo. In other words, it's going to begin on the and of one in an imagined complete pickup bar. This will yield a much better result than starting with a gasp of only an eighth note's length to begin the etude. Also regarding breathing, I recommend leaving out one of the 16th notes toward the end in order to get another quick breath and finish strongly. This yields a much more pleasing result than interrupting the flow of the piece by stopping to get a breath and yet playing all of the notes. So if you listen to the demonstration videos that I provided, you'll see where that one note that I leave out is. And honestly, if you're not listening for it, you're not going to realize that it's there. Because what I'm doing is, yeah, I'm leaving out a 16th note, but getting that one extra breath just helps to maintain a strong sound and an even flow of the piece all the way to the end. Ninth, while the key signature is 5 flats or 3 flats in the treble clef version, the key is not concert D flat major, but rather concert B flat minor. While mastery of the concert D flat major scale will help with this etude, mastering concert B flat minor will help even more. On the Ole Miss Low Brass website, there are sets of scale and arpeggio routines, and the level 2 routines there include an exercise in every key which introduces minor scales in relation to the major scale with the same key signature. So in other words, if you look at the concert D flat routine, the B flat minor scales are included also. You might find those or other scale exercises in B flat minor to be helpful for you. And finally, practice in the key of F major as well, as the 8-bar phrase in measures 9 to 16 uses lots of accidentals to effect a modulation to that key. If you can think in F or G for treble clef euphonium players in that section instead of trying to remember all of the accidentals individually, you might find your life to be quite a bit simpler.